Wow. I am so disappointed in Game of Thrones, and so is Kyle Munzenreider. He wrote for Yahoo News that he and the Munzenreider family are very upset because...
Did he say the whole family was upset? Or
yeah,
was it just
the whole
him?
Munzenreider.
Okay.
They're very upset because he thought that Game of Thrones was going to have something to say about the topic of immigration and the introduction of new populations. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know. When one of the banners is a guy who is upside down and they're flaying him, I don't know. I'm not looking for any really big social meanings coming from these people. They're barbarians.
And my understanding of the series, which is in effect limited, I would admit.
Yes, it is.
The people in Game of Thrones aren't exactly people you're supposed to look up to for their virtue, right? There's many of them are.
There's maybe two. There's maybe two in there, and even those guys are sketchy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But they're trying to be good people.
Right.
All right. Everybody else is like, kill him.
Right. Like there's been how many murders in this show, and you're worried about their stances on immigration?
Yeah, no, it's not even murders. It's not even murders.
Torture.
Yeah, they're feeding people alive to dogs, okay? This is not something... They literally, one of the characters had been tortured for almost like a half a season. Tortured, like nailed to a big cross like an X, and then they skinned him alive, they cut parts of his body off. Tortured this guy, okay? And we're looking for moral... Really? You're looking for... These guys are going to have... there's a good lesson there.
What was the family again? I'm sorry.
Which...
The family this
is the Munzenreiders.
The Munzenreiders family.
Munzenreider.
Did he write an article previously of, I really have an issue with the Game of Thrones stance on torture, where they're torturing everyone for seasons at a time?
Well, listen to him, because he makes a very good point. Okay. Where once it seemed like Game of Thrones had something to say about the topic of immigration and the introduction of new populations in the staid-old continent of Westeros. Mr. Munzenreider, I don't know if you know, Westeros is fake. Okay?
Well, maybe we haven't looked hard enough for it.
Well, could be. Because they're now trying to burn up entire ethnic groups, revealing that Game of Thrones only introduced them in the first place to populate its numerous bloodbaths.
Oh,
yes!
Yeah. I mean,
yes!
That's why people are watching the show.
Right, I don't know.
Now, there's a commentary there that's a little bit interesting.
One of us is missing something, and I don't think it's me. Entire peoples with proud, interesting heroes have been given the send-off. Well, they're real. They're not entire peoples with proud, interesting histories. They don't exist. Okay? It's a TV show.
So
Game of Thrones. Listen to this. Munzenreider. Game of Thrones first started teasing that it had something big to say about the human costs of the idea of borders with the wildlings, or as they preferred to be known, the free folk. The group was hated by many of those in Westeros simply because they had been hated for years. It was tradition, while, of course, we know now there was actually a very good reason why that wall had to go up in the first place. Most of the characters in the show didn't believe that White Walkers and other assorted supernatural threats beyond the wall actually existed. I bet you Munzenreider is not a guy who believes in God. Okay, listen to him say. He's saying, well, that's because they didn't believe. There were so many people that didn't believe in the supernatural. I mean, there's a really good reason. It wasn't hate. Listen to this. It wasn't hate. It was their lack of belief in the supernatural. Oh. Again, I think you're missing something. One of us is, and I don't, again, think it's me. While, of course, we now know there was a good reason the wall had to go up in the first place, most of the characters didn't believe that the White Walkers and other supernatural threats beyond the wall existed. Most of them had come believed that the wall was simply there to keep the free folk out. The show then spent several seasons humanizing the free folk, tracking the peace, and eventually came to the peace that they came to with the Northerners, and exposing. The show was exposing centuries of old bigotries.
Oh my gosh. This is unreal.
They're not centuries of old bigotries. It was a fat guy, probably in his underpants behind a typewriter or his computer, typing this in just a few years ago. There are no centuries of bigotry.
You should be thrilled to find this out. I mean, you thought these poor people were being crushed and their dreams dissolved, and yet in reality, they didn't have any dreams because they're not a thing. Does this not fall into the life of the old phrase we used to use back in the day of just get a life?
Yes,
that's really all it is.
If this
is your life, and you're upset at the statements Game of Thrones is making about immigration, I mean, these poor. People say snowflakes all the time, and it's an overused term. We get it, but like, can you imagine if these leftists had to deal with what conservatives deal with? Every show says your values are horrible. Every show tells you that what you believe is the worst thing on the planet. They're all designed to tell you how awful you are. And we still sit here and be like, it was a good show, even though they told me that anyone who doesn't believe in abortion should be murdered. But I mean, it was a good show.
Right.
Like, we have to deal with this all the time. We don't cry about it and write op-eds about the disappointment you have in the series.
It is amazing to me. This is just amazing to me. Think of this guy's life, how privileged this guy's life really is. He goes on to say, the show spent several seasons humanizing the free folk and exposing centuries of old bigotries as nonsense. Indeed, some of the biggest, purest romantic storylines on the show were between free folk and the Westeros citizens. It wasn't hard to see the show grappling with what Westeros would look like after it came to recognize the free folk as equals. What?
I'm listening. I have no. Not only do I not understand his point, I still don't understand any of the characters. So it's really hard.
What would it look like? Would there be an eighth kingdom? A spot on the small council? In some ways, the show still might attempt that, but it's not like that many free folk are left to even work with. This is insane. Now, I'm surprised he didn't go here, but he could have gone to where I immediately thought. When I saw this, I thought, of course they send the minorities. Of course they send not the free folk in, because they're all white. They're all from the north. Who do they send in first? They send in the minorities from a distant land. That's who they send in. And then who's second? Oh, I don't know, the Unsullied. Oh, those were the slaves that you freed. Really? And all the white people ran to the castle. That's the real injustice. That's the way white people will do you every time.